tree. Basic control of the ship depended upon the signals from her partner's brain, and the stroke and counterstroke of the next passage at arms were over before Ellie had fully grasped that it was about to start. One reason Frank Marcus sat as commander in the left seat was that he was faster than Ellie by far. But then he was faster than anyone. Frank the legendary. Even 2 minutes ago, Ellie had still nursed conscious hopes that he might be able to get them out of this alive. He was driving them in evasive maneuvers now, while the hull crashed like a gong and flashes of enemy force were playing in the simultaneous overload of instruments. Flash and crash again, blinding stroke from the enemy and blending sigh of their own weapons lashing back, more in defiance than in any true hope of damaging Goliath. The berserker which had caught them by surprise was too big to fight, too fast to get away from, here in relatively open space. Nothing to do but dodge. Yet again the berserker struck, and yet again they emerged whole from the barrage. They were characters in some fantasy cartoon, staggering along a tightrope and parrying a rain of meteoric irons with the flimsy stalk of a broken umbrella. "Little ship!" Between great blasts of static, that was the voice of the berserker reaching them. It was trying to talk, only to distract them, perhaps, or perhaps to offer life of a sort. There were sometimes living, willing servitors, and sometimes there were specimens that the unliving enemy found interesting enough to be kept breathing for a long time under study. Distraction, with the game effectively over, might seem a pointless waste of tactical finesse, but the enemy's tactics were varied by randomizing devices and tended to be unpredictable. "Still ship, new weapons will not save you." The voice was quavering, neither male nor female, neither old nor young. It was assembled from the recorded words of prisoners, of good life, the willing servitors, of defiant human enemies who had cursed the thing before they died, and whose very curses were put to its use. "New weapons? What the hell does that mean?" Like many who fought berserkers, Frank Marcus seemed to believe in hell, at least enough to swear by it. "That's what it said." "Helpless, bad life." A great static roar. "You are too small." The message or distraction from the enemy dissolved utterly in noise. No carrier wave could any longer bring it through the furious radiation from the plasma jet. Mumbling something to himself, Frank danced the duo ship around the jet. He dropped his craft from normal space into that condition called flight space, where physical existence outside the guarded hull became little more than mathematics, and outracing light became not only possible but unavoidable. He brought them bursting back again into normal space, a fearful risk this near the great mass of a star. He had a way, had luck, had something no one could bottle or even measure that, in addition to his speed, made for success against berserkers. Ellie had heard the claim that, given 1,000 human pilots with this potency, humanity might have won the long war centuries ago. Cloning of his cells had been tried to produce a race of Franks, but the results had been disappointing. Just behind them, so Ellie read the flickerings that raced across her panels, the Jetstar's solar wind exploded like the surface of a wavy pond attacked by a sharp-skipping pebble. A chain of blasts expanded into spheres of force and gas. Behind them, too, delayed but not avoided, the pursuing monster came, its prey once more in view. The berserker made a dark, irregular blot against giant swirls of bright nebula that were far too distant to provide a hiding place, the stuff of the galaxy in an age-long expulsion from the galactic heart. The enemy was a tiny blot 100 kilometers across. Frank would never quit. In 140 milliseconds, he skipped his ship through a distance equal to the diameter of Earth's orbit, whipping it once more out of normal space and once more back, intact, a blind man safely juggling razors. This time, space around them was different when they came back. white noise on Ellie's view screen. Peculiar readings everywhere, but at the same time silence and stability. "Frank?" "Yeah, we're inside the jet, Ellie. As I figured, it turned out to be a hollow tube. We're riding it out away from the star at a couple 100 kilometers per second. The boogie's still outside." How can you tell?" Something resembling amusement shaded Frank's business voice. "If it was in here with us, it'd still be trying to chew us up, right?" "Oh." She hadn't heard such meekness in her own shipboard voice for years. That word had come out in a novice trainee's timid chirp. She had heard the like from a good many of them during her tour as instructor at Space Combat School. Frank was talking. "So it's going to know we're here in the tube because there's nowhere else we can be. It'll try to get a fix on just where we are inside. Probably won't be able to. Then it'll come in after us. It'll come fairly slowly. It must compute it has us cold, and it has no reason to take the kind of chance we just did. As soon as it does come in, we go." "Where?" "Yeah, that's the question." Again in Frank's voice a shade of humor, this time laced with bitterness. Then a new note of urgent thought. "Ellie, take a look at that cloud down at the end of this pipe. Ever see anything like that before?" She adjusted her instruments and learned to begin with that. The inner surface of the great jet bearing them along was about 5,000 kilometers away as they rode near its center. Directly behind them was the sun that fueled and projected the enormous jet and hurled down its hollow center a torrent of particle radiation from which the duo ship's hull had so far shielded its occupants. While directly ahead, their strange jet fed a nebula perhaps even stranger, one which at their present speed they should reach in less than an hour. Ellie scanned it as best she could, and made very little sense of what her instruments reported. The nebula seemed to be emitting fiercely at many wavelengths, while absorbing greedily at others. For a moment she thought there was a grand pattern to be detected, but the indications for order were fleeting, and in another moment chaos had intervened. "Go into that in flight space?" she thought. "It's far too dense. We'll hit it like a solid wall." "Hey, Ellie?" The voice in her earphones was suddenly much changed, with a difference she did not at first comprehend. She answered numbly, "What?" "Come over, will you? We've got a solid quarter-hour before there's anything we need to do." She might have said that there was nothing they could do, now or in 15 minutes. But she unfastened herself from the clasp of her acceleration couch and drifted free of it, a blonde young woman, large and strong. The artificial gravity was now set in combat mode, operating only as needed to counter otherwise unbearable accelerations. As Ellie moved to open one of the hatches communicating with the other half of the ship's living space, some thoughts about a last goodbye were skipping through her mind, and something about suicide, which she would prefer to being captured live by a berserker. Most of the space in the commander's small cabin was occupied by Frank's acceleration couch and by his body. It was not easy to see just where the one ended and the other began. Photographs Ellie had seen of Frank, made before that brush with the berserker 9 years back had almost cost him his life, showed a trim-waisted, young-looking man, so intense that even his image seemed to thrum with extra energy. Now, what the berserker and the surgeons had left of that vital body was permanently cushioned in fluids and encased in armor. The 3 cable-connected units in which Frank lived struck Ellie sometimes as a lazy costumer's concept of an insect body. There were head, thorax, and abdomen, but no face to turn to Ellie as she entered. She knew, though, that Frank would be watching her with a part of his instrument perceptions, while he remained wired directly to the sensors of the ship and adequately alert. One plastic and metal arm rose from the central box to acknowledge her presence with a small wave. Ellie's eyes and ears and mind still rang with battle. She felt half-stunned into stupidity. "What?" she asked again, into the silence. "Just wanted to enjoy your company." Frank's voice, sounding completely human and natural, issued now from a speaker near her head. The arm, too thin and too lacking in fingers to be human, meanwhile extended itself a little farther and stroked her shoulder. Its hand slid along to her waist. The familiar feel of it was not unpleasant. Its movement was gentle and its texture smooth, like warm skin. Something about it, maybe the hardness of the underlying structure, always gave Ellie the sensation of encountering powerful masculinity. Now the arm began to tug her drifting figure toward the body boxes on their segmented couch, and now she understood at last. "You're crazy!" The words broke from her almost in a laugh, but still with something like conviction. "Why crazy? I told you we've got 15 minutes. Frank couldn't be wrong about a thing like that. When Frank went off duty, it was safe to go. "Sorry if you're not in the mood. Imagine a great big kiss right about here." His voice performed a cheerful sound effect. Another hand, this one partly of flesh, and feeling no more and no less strong and sure and male because of that, came from somewhere and went to work with an infinitely sure touch upon the clasps of the single garment that Ellie routinely wore inside her couch. She closed her eyes, despaired of being able to think of anything important like suicide and goodbye, and ceased to try. The inner surfaces of the artifact's abdomen, evolving to embrace her as she let herself be drawn against them, were not cold or metallic. As usual at this point, she had a moment of feeling rather ridiculous, being reminded of a leathery vaulting horse that she had straddled in some gym class long ago. And now, once more, the touch of human flesh. Frank had said 15 minutes. In less than 12, Ellie was safely and snugly back in her own combat couch, tuned in on all her instruments and ready for business. Trust Commander Frank to see to it that nothing interfered with that. All hatches were once more closed solidly again, as per regulations. Combat was now imminent, whereas 12 minutes back it had not been. Years ago, Ellie had realized that Ellie Temesvar, shunned by some men as too overpowering in several ways, couldn't begin to sustain any close personal relationship with this sometime shipmate of hers. She never felt so much used, abused, liked, disliked, or loved by him as she felt simply befuddled. Her thoughts and feelings about him, it was as if she never was given a chance to develop any. Perhaps any she did start to develop, good or bad, were blown and swept away as soon as they began to sprout by some contrary aspect of the man. He simply did too much and knew too much and was too much. Off duty, she tended to avoid Frank Marcus and tended not to talk about him, even when the curious pressed for information. 13 minutes of the 15 gone, and now Frank began to explain his developing plan, if that was the right word, for their next tactic. If it was suicidal, she thought, at least it was grander and dicier than swallowing any little pills. Meanwhile, the odd nebula at the approaching end of the great glowing tunnel continued to fly closer. And now the last of Frank's quarter-hour passed, marked by no event more vital than an increasing flickering and tattering of the tunnel's plasma wall, which here began to churn almost like a mass of falling water. The jet was now starting to disperse, the speed of its material increasing rapidly, evidently